this DevEx live conversation with U.S. Senator Ben Cardin. I'd love to welcome up Mark Vizo, who is the president and CEO of PACT, who's underwriting this conversation this morning and is a wonderful partner for this event, to provide some opening remarks. And I'm also going to invite Senator Cardin and Raj Kumar, president and editor-in-chief of DevEx, to take a seat at the front as well.
Well, good morning, everyone. Isn't it wonderful to be here with this view? I was joking with Suhail, our host from Microsoft, be careful. We might all just stay here for the rest of the day and work out of his offices, and he'd have to feed us and take care of us. But thank you for hosting us. As was said, I'm the president and CEO of PACT, and we're absolutely delighted to partner with Raj and DevEx by underwriting this event. And I'm particularly honored to have the opportunity to introduce Senator Ben Cardin, a steadfast congressional champion of foreign assistance, which we all know and respect greatly. I'll keep my remarks brief because I know we all came to hear Senator Cardin, but I did want to share a couple of thoughts about what brings us here today. From climate change and economic inequality to food insecurity and rampant urbanization, we all know we live in a time of great challenges and great need. But it's also a time of great opportunity for us to help those who need it most. Last week, up in New York at the UN General Assembly, the Gates Foundation released a report that detailed some significant improvements that we all heralded over the past decades in maternal mortality, HIV and AIDS, sanitation, and other improvements in key areas. These accomplishments are partially the result of international development organizations like some of you in this room, working to address the intractable scourge of poverty and marginalization, attacking the drivers and causes, not just the symptoms, helping people to own their future through sustainable local and market-based solutions. But international development organizations and all of us together still have a long way to go to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in time for 2030. And I have to confess that the old way of doing development from project to project, though necessary, is insufficient to get us there. What we need to invest in systemic solutions and develop robust and dynamic partnerships, business and governments, NGOs and local organizations where we work and with whom we serve to reach those goals in time for 2030. We see promising examples of this today. Some international NGOs, and we like to think that PACT is one of those, are trying to transform how we work, offering a fourth sector model, which combines the power of the public and private sectors, merging for impact and for profit. We also, fortunately, see more and more leadership from the business community wanting to make a social impact. Our host today, Microsoft, is a great example of this, bravely partnering with PACT to address child labor in the mineral supply chain. These radical shifts in how we do development are happening because it's the only way to improve the living conditions of millions of people around the globe at the scale we need by 2030. But government is critical in this work. It builds the financial, regulatory, legislative foundations and infrastructure that allows any of this to happen in the first place. But its role starts with, most importantly, the political will and belief that development works, that it is, at its core, a worthy investment. For many of us, this will sometimes seem far too absent in Washington. We hear policymakers debating the value of spending just 1% of the U.S. budget to help millions enhance our national security, create stable markets for U.S. companies, and to benefit people's lives. Some voices are louder than others, making it harder than ever, unfortunately, to understand the long-term vision for U.S. foreign assistance right now. But today, this morning, we're fortunate to hear from one of the most informed and prominent voices on this issue, and to benefit from his insights on how development organizations and fellow partners in this grand crusade can navigate what is happening in Washington. As the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Cardin once said that in this complex global environment, the United States needs an approach that is, I quote, creative, sober, patient, and far-sighted in its national security strategy. As a senior senator from Maryland and former chairman of the International Development and Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, Senator Cardin has been a champion of human rights, transparency, anti-corruption, and the rule of law, all essential building blocks for effective development. He has been a supporter of diplomacy and development as core pillars of our foreign policy and a tireless advocate for America's continued active engagement in the world. So to borrow his own words and repeat them back to him, which is undoubtedly very uncomfortable to hear, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure and honor to introduce a creative, sober, patient, and far-sighted voice, Senator Ben Cardin.
Wow.
Thank you.
Well, that was a very generous introduction. Thank you very much. I thank Pat for the work that you do, and Debex, I thank you for putting this together. And thank you all for being here. More importantly, thank you for what you do. You are our heroes, and I'm going to put a lot more, I think, importance on the work that you do now than ever before, and how active you need to be in regards to the policies of our country. But first, a thank you. I know this is going to be a conversation, but let me just make a couple opening comments. Those of you who have been to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee know that I often quote America's strength. Our strength are in our ideals. Yes, we have the strongest military in the world, and we're very proud of the men and women who serve in our military. But our strength is our ideals. Yes, we have the strongest economy in the world, and we know it needs to be even stronger. And we're proud about what we can accomplish here. If you follow your dreams, how you can become very successful. But our strength is in our ideals, what we believe in: good governance, respect for human rights, democracy, anti-corruption. They're our strengths. In order to protect the strengths of America, we need a national security policy. That includes a strong military to protect our boundaries and protect our physical security and to protect America's global interests. But it's the 3 Ds that are important: diplomacy, development assistance, and defense. And I think you all understand that. And it's being challenged. We know that. America's great accomplishments we've been able to do because of our investment in diplomacy and development assistance. We've seen that in our crusade for global health. One of the great accomplishments of America was our leadership in PEPFAR. It not only paid off in regards to the direct benefits in fighting AIDS and other diseases, but we now have the capacity in countries to deal with the challenges that exist there. We saw America's leadership in fighting against modern-day slavery and trafficking, and what we're able to do in dealing with that humanitarian need, but also fighting the corruption that's associated with trafficking. We've seen America's leadership in the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals and fighting global poverty. This is where America has shined in the global community. And we've seen America's leadership in helping countries develop democratic systems and fighting corruption so that they can have governments that can be all-inclusive and don't give space for terrorist organizations to thrive. So we've seen America's leadership at its best. We've also seen tough American leadership, where we said, no, we're not going to give you trading rights unless you change your apartheid government in South Africa. And that leadership brought about a change in a country. You saw America's tough leadership against the Soviet Union on its immigration policies. And we saw America's tough leadership against Iran, where we led the international community in isolating the country unless they were willing to enter into an agreement to give up their rogue nuclear program. So we've seen America's leadership at its best. But today it's being challenged, as I said earlier. It's being challenged by President Trump. His America First policy and the way that he uses his rhetoric has been very damaging to America's credibility globally in regards to use of development assistance and diplomacy. We've seen that in his policies on immigration, including the most recent ban that is still a veiled message that we're going to have a religious test as to who can come to America. That's not what America stands for. That's not our values. We see it over and over again on policies that he's been implementing that are offensive to the international community. And we see it through the budget that he submitted. As I think all of you are well aware, that would devastate the ability for us to have an effective development assistance program globally. We've seen it also at the State Department, where we have a reorganization effort which looks like it's a solution in search for a problem. We see that at the State Department that has not filled critical positions, and we're wondering, why haven't they filled these positions? So it's demoralizing, and it's a wrong signal to the international community, which leads to my major point for being here today. We know that America depends upon its strong defense, which includes development assistance and diplomacy. We also know that we're not getting the leadership that we want to see from the President of the United States. That means your responsibilities are even more today than they were before, to speak out for the importance of these programs and to move forward in our efforts to make sure that America maintains its commitment to its national defense through diplomacy and development assistance, and through our values. And that means that my responsibility in the Congress is more important than ever before. There's good news here. The good news is that this is not a partisan division in Congress. We have strong bipartisan support for America's role in diplomacy and defense and in development assistance. We know that, and we've seen incredible leadership, particularly on those that serve on the Armed Services Committee, that recognize the importance of the work being done by the State Department. So there's hope out there, but we need to be united, and we need to be better focused, and we need to be committed in order to protect America's national security.
Thank you so much, Senator, and you both, please, please, deserves a round of applause. I want to add my own welcome, Raj Kumar. I'm the President and Editor-in-Chief of DevX. Both Mark and the Senator, I think, helped to frame up the big issues that we're here to talk about today. It's hard to stay focused on those big threads when you see the day-to-day news, right, that distracts us. But we want to try to stay on that. I was just in New York at the UN General Assembly, and when the President was in that great hall and talked about the total destruction of North Korea, there was this collective gasp in the room. And I think there was a similar gasp from the folks who are here today and those joining us on the live stream when the budget was announced. There was a sense of, wow, this is real. Since then, we've had a couple of continuing resolutions. We have not seen the budget go down for foreign assistance. We've seen it go up a little bit. It seems like this coalition you just described, a bipartisan coalition on both sides of the aisle, has sort of come together. And so I guess the question I think a lot of people in this room probably have is, where should we be concerned right now as a community that cares about achieving the global goals, about America's role in global development? What are the pressure points when we think about the budget or what this administration might be looking to do, what those who don't agree with the agenda you just laid out are looking to do on the Hill? Where should we be specifically concerned right now?
Well, you know, the concerns, you need to have a broad area of concern, because we have a lot of people in the administration that are on our side on the importance of development assistance and are fighting for that. We have leaders in various key positions that support what we're trying to do, and we see their statements and actions every day. But then we see the action from a budget director, or we see the comments from the President of the United States, or we see the lack of activity from the Secretary of State that we want to see, that causes us concern. So let's take this, probably to dissect this a little bit. The budget submitted by the President was outrageous. It was called dead on arrival by the Republicans because it was so outrageous as it related to the 150, the development assistance areas. So the President submitted a budget with a 30+% cut, and the high water mark now is what the Senate subcommittee has done with a 4% cut. It should be a 10% increase. It shouldn't be a 4% cut. So we recognize that it's not just what's happening in defense areas with development assistance and diplomacy. We're seeing this across the budget, these draconian type cuts because of the current economic priorities. So you've got to be concerned, yes, with the development assistance budget, but also be concerned about the overall budget issues in which we're working under, whether we can come up and get rid of sequestration. We need to get rid of sequestration. driving force for that is the Department of Defense. But if we can get rid of it, let's get rid of it. We have less of a threat today about a CR than we have in the past, because some think a CR might be a good
So
outcome.
far, they've been good, right?
Yeah, so they work out okay. So on the budget front, I really do believe that if you drill down to the specific needs, there's tremendous support.
What about on some of the specifics we saw in the president's budget, things like the development assistance account being folded into ESF? Is that something we don't need to worry about anymore, or some of the specific agency cuts that we saw, OPIC, USIP, are those agencies now secure and safe? Should we move on to focus on other issues?
They're probably safe from the point of view of congressional action, but we're not 100% sure. We are trying to look at the legalities of when Congress acts and the administration doesn't carry out what we say they should carry out. Because we're seeing at times that we have provided resources and they don't spend the resources. We initiated, as you know, the anti-propaganda defense in Europe, working with our allies in regards to Russia's attack. It was an initiative by Congress. It was put in the appropriation process. It's now in the bill the president signed, the authorization from our committee. But it took a long time before the president released any of those funds. Yeah. So just because Congress is on your side doesn't mean you're going to have the administration implementing those policies. And so, no, you're not out of the woods. We have to continue the press, and we need as definitive action as we can from Congress, but we also need to get Congress in oversight to make sure the administration carries out what we say.
It seems like Congress is stepping up more in that oversight role. I know one of the CRs, the first one, included language that said USAID can't go talk to a foreign government about closing a mission. They've got to come to the oversight committees first. Do you feel like that step up is having some influence now? You've got someone like Mark Green in that role at USAID. Right. Does it feel like the oversight role is getting stronger than it was, say, a year ago?
Well, Mark Green is one of the bright spots in the administration. He has a great deal of confidence among both Democrats and Republicans. He's committed to the goal of USAID. So I think he is one of the bright lights in the Trump administration, and I'm very pleased that he decided to go forward under extremely challenging circumstances. So I think that is a bright spot. I think the congressional oversight has been spotty. I don't give it high marks. We do a lot of good things and passing a lot of good appropriations and authorization bills, but I think our oversight has not been as strong as it needs to be. I think part of that is that since the Republicans controlled the Congress, they're more reluctant to have critical oversight hearings and opportunities because of the partisan obligations that they believe they have as being the majority.
You were outspoken on this. You just mentioned a minute ago the idea that the administration could get appropriations from Congress but not actually spend all the money and use that as kind of a backdoor way to cut the budget. You have that example of that sort of anti-propaganda Russia fund in the State Department that you referenced. Have you now found any other examples? You've met with a lot of NGO leaders. I know it's something your team has been looking into. Do you sense that there are other places where the administration is trying this tactic?
I can show you all the vacant positions they haven't filled. I mean, that's one way you can do it. And of course, if you don't have leadership in a department, the resources aren't going to be allocated the way that we would hope to. There's no real accountability in that. Yes, we've seen many examples where there have been priorities expressed by the president's budget that are different than what Congress has done, where the administration has been slow, in some cases non-existent, in implementing the budgets for those priorities. So yes, we see that. We see that in missions in many countries are being very much changed, even though Congress has authorized a more robust mission in those countries. So yes, I am concerned about that.
Yeah, I guess a mission director has budget, but they get a directive that's different from the administration. What about the reorg at State Department? You referred to it a little bit earlier. I assume you saw that memo that Secretary Tillerson had sent out. Did you get that? Did your committee get that before it went out? Did you know what the contents would be?
I'm going to give the administration at least fair marks in working with members of Congress. They have been keeping our staffs informed. We've had input. I think some of our input has been expressed in the way that they're going about the reorganization. So they are working with us. They are not making unilateral declarations, and we're not being caught off guard. Having said that, we still question the motives of the reorganization. We don't see the fundamental problems. It started with the budget, which had no reality at all to the need for reorganization within the State Department. We always welcome doing things more efficiently. We always welcome greater accountability within agencies. That's always welcome. There's always ways of improving that. So there is some merit to reviewing the organization within the State Department. We acknowledge that. But the manner in which this started did not reflect that type of concern. It was more a massive change of our direction on development assistance, cutting it back. It was also reducing a lot of missions that we felt were wrong, and it didn't seem to make much sense. And so we're working in that context. But having said that, we're trying to work with the administration and see where they're heading. We saw early drafts of mission statements that were extremely, we thought, damaging. We've seen now revisions that are more positive. So we've seen some positive impact. But I don't want to, look, what I say often about the Trump administration, we've set such a low bar of expectations that when we reach it, we seem happy. We're not happy. We need to have more input.
Are we out of the woods on the idea of a USAID State Department merger? Or acquisition, maybe is a better term. Are we out of the woods on that?
Well, I must tell you, anyone in the know is against it, including, you know, we certainly get vibes from the leadership of the State Department that they're very much opposed to it. The leadership at USAID seems to be very much opposed to it. The members of Congress are very much opposed to it. So it seems like anyone who has any real knowledge of the need for the USAID have been opposed to being consumed by the State Department. However, we don't know who's going to make the decision. So we know that every senior advisor advised President Trump against leaving the Paris climate, and yet he did make that announcement. So we don't know exactly whether he makes decisions based upon the advice coming up through the knowledgeable people or not. If it is, we're safe. If it's not, we could have a problem.
Does he have the authority to do it as far as you're concerned?
I think it's, I might be wrong, but I think it's the budget director that has the ultimate decision here. Somebody might help me on that, but I'm not sure who makes, but put it this way, if the president orders it to be done, it's going to be done. Now, we may try to change that in Congress, don't get me wrong, and then we might get into that argument. There's certainly language in the Appropriations Committee that's moving forward, and there's certainly been interest for our committee to legislate in this direction if we need to. We thought we already have legislated. We think he needs legislation to change it, by the way. So that's another issue, whether he can do it by executive decision or not. That may be challenged legally.
But you're right, that, you know, the power of the president, even just to say that this is the policy, without the authority, can have a huge effect.
Right, and it's a reality if the president, if the president says we're going to handle it this way. We have the same problems, as you know, on what he's doing with Homeland Security on some of the immigration issues. There's a lot of things he can do that are contrary to what Congress wants him to do, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. But, you know, we're spending a lot of time arguing these issues, which are very important. We'd rather be talking about a cooperative effort to strengthen America's national security needs by having a development policy that is coordinated, that makes us safer. But instead, we're arguing how the chairs are aligned on the deck, which is important. Don't get me wrong, but it's taking a lot of energy.
So one of the things you've referred now a couple of times to the kind of national security argument for development. One of the things we didn't say in your introduction is you are the political equivalent of a no-hitter. You pitch the equivalent, right? Am I right? You haven't lost an election, as far as I understand. I look back in your history. You were elected now for over 50 years. You've served in public life, starting when you were in law school. You won your first race for the Maryland House of Delegates. You're the youngest speaker there. So you have a sense of how to do this. And
well, remember, we're still in the early innings, so it's
sure. So my question is, I don't want to retire you too soon. My question is this. What's the right argument for the people in this room, for people who believe in global development issues, who articulated what Mark articulated, what you articulated at the beginning, what's the right argument to voters? There is certainly a national security argument, but there's quite a debate happening, I think, in the advocacy community. How much should we focus on global health security as a way to talk about pandemics, bioterrorism as a way to galvanize support? How much should we just revert back to a humanitarian issue? You know, there's a lot of support from faith communities on these issues. How do we talk about this now with a President Donald Trump in office?
Well, I think first, again, we go back to American values. And I think American values are that we are a generous nation. We believe that where we can help people that are in need, we should help. So when you see a disaster, such as these natural disasters that have occurred, Americans want to help. They open up their own private pocketbooks, and they expect our government to be there to help. So we recognize that we're a blessed nation, that we have capacities that other nations don't have. We also recognize America's leadership, that we have a leadership capacity that no other country has. I think most Americans understand that, appreciate that, and want it to be used. So we do want to help people that are in need around the world. Our problem is, have we been able to put a face on it? When you talk about millions, it doesn't mean much. When you talk about the individual who's in need, that does raise the concerns of Americans. So I think if we can personalize the needs that are out there, if we can show the examples, Americans will respond, and they'll want their government to be generous in responding on the humanitarian issues. I think Americans also understand that they rather invest money than invest our soldiers. So they recognize that this is, I think what General Mattis said is a very powerful message. If you don't fund development assistance, you're going to have to give me more soldiers and bullets. I think that's an important point for us to underscore, that this is in our national security interest, and it can protect the overuse and unnecessary use of our military. We want our military to be there, but we don't want them to be used where it's not necessary to be used. I think that's a very important point. And then lastly, there is an economic issue to be made here. I mean, we have people in this country that are sitting in this room that recognize the economic impact of what we do globally. We're not only the direct economic impact, but we're developing consumers and markets that are going to be part of our economic strategy moving forward. And I think that's an important point, and that said lastly. But then lastly, our purpose for development assistance is for a country to become self-sufficient, and they don't need our development assistance. So this is not a story that doesn't have a good ending. The ending is that we have self-sufficient countries that join us in fighting terrorism, that buy our products, that join us in our global commitments. That's what this is about. And if you explain it that way, I think you get tremendous support. And as you recognize, less than 1% of the budget, that's a small, it's a small price to pay for all the benefits we get.
We've got a very knowledgeable and interested group in the audience today, so I want to take time to turn to all of you for questions. We'll try to take a few at a time and go from there. I think we've got a mic to come around as well. So just wait for the mic if you don't mind. Try to keep it brief with a question mark on the end would be ideal. And tell us your name and organization. We've got one here, another one here, another one here.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for coming. Paul Klayman, UNDP. We spent years both in the Congress eliminating earmarks. We're finally there. Is it time now to re-implement earmarks to get this administration to do about what Congress wants it to do?
All right, let's take a couple more quickly.
Well, I have sort of an opposite question. It's Lois Pace from the Global Health Council. Good to see you again, Senator. And, really appreciated your comments on global health and PEPFAR specifically, being able to provide leverage for us in this space. I think we in the community are also more focused on integrated development and recognizing that various programs can serve one another in good ways and can more importantly serve people on the ground if we think holistically about what it is we're doing. Is that hopeless at this point because of the interest in looking at initiatives, very specific initiatives, and calling out specific programs? Because I know we'd like to think about how we better leverage our resources and maximize our return on those investments, but we'd like some more guidance from you as to how feasible that is at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, and you can pass it down to Eric.
So Eric Boyle with ICF. So you'd mentioned that Administrator Mark Green is one of the bright spots in this administration. Just curious how you could characterize the conversations or coordination he's had with Congress to date, especially regarding some of the more recent announcements that have been made regarding expansion of the Presidential Malaria Initiative, as well as refocus of Feed the Future. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for those. Yeah, Devix reported on this from New York that the Presidential Malaria Initiative is being expanded. Let's start with that. Let's start with Mark Green and the relationship between him and members of your committee.
Well, I think Mark Green is well respected, not just by the members of Congress. I think he has the confidence within the administration. And, you know, he's a seasoned diplomat. He's had posts overseas. He knows the Congress as a former member. He has relationships. He has credibility. He served in difficult positions. He understands political realities. He's working in an area where he has not been directly challenged by the White House, which is good. And I think that's part of his strategy, is to figure out that space where he doesn't run into conflict. So yes, I think the fact that he's been able to get more resources and programs that are extremely important and popular on Capitol Hill has been very encouraging. The fact that he was able to clarify a mission statement pretty quickly, to me, is very encouraging. We were worried that we were going to lose that part of our mission statements is to eradicate poverty and to deal with the democracy. And the revised statements that we saw included all that. So I stand by. I think he is one of the bright spots. Earmarks. Look, my senior senator when I was elected was Barbara Mikulski. Barbara, my position was in favor of earmarks. Otherwise, I could never have gotten next to my senior senator. So, and I say that affectionately. I say that affectionately because Barbara Mikulski is still one of the great leaders in our country, and recognized how we could, how Congress has the responsibility. That's our responsibility, not the executive responsibility. How money is spent, and if we don't direct how it's spent, it means unelected bureaucrats will make those decisions rather than members of Congress. Were there abuses and earmarks? Absolutely. Did we clean it up? Yes, we did. The transparency and the equalities and the standards in which we had to present our earmarks were pretty well defined. And I had hours of negotiations with the appropriators on all the earmarks that I recommended. And I'm very proud of those earmarks. So I think it was a mistake by Congress to eliminate earmarks. And I think there's a large number who would like to get it back. I think in this political environment with the Republican leadership, it's unlikely. However, if you look at the Graham-Cassidy bill, you're going to see a lot of earmarks in the Graham-Cassidy bill. So it comes back in different ways, and I think we'll find ways in which we can better direct spending, and perhaps what the Trump administration is doing and not following us may give us stronger incentives to do earmarks. Your question on how we can be more effective in leveraging, I think, is a very important point. I look at the United Nations efforts in the Sustainable Development Goal, the Millennium Goals, as a model. We set pretty ambitious goals. We had accountability where we could judge whether we're doing that or not. We put up America resources, but we also leveraged it. We have private groups that were a part of our strategy, all working together, and we made amazing progress. It's going to be challenged right now because the interim evaluations on the Sustainable Development Goals are not as positive as we would like to see them, which means that we have to coordinate a lot better. I think leveraging and coordination is key. You can't do this without U.S. development assistance, but you can't do it just with U.S. development assistance. And I think that point has to be underscored.
Let's go get another round of questions. We've got 1, 2, and a Devix reporter in the back. Jonathan, want to start? Just tell us your name and organization as well, and wait for the mic. Thanks.
Jonathan Papalias with World Vision. Thank you for your remarks.
Sure.
I fully agree on the need for leveraging and coordination, especially in the development process. One place that the 3 Ds are most needed are in fragile states, where the poverty is the highest, the infant mortality is the highest literacy, etc. You've been quite vocal talking about the governance challenges there. My question is, how important is a focus on fragile states right now for you, and where do you see American leadership needing to play a role in this global community, which is increasingly focusing on fragility as well? The regional development banks, the World Bank, the UN, and others. Thank you.
Thanks. You can pass it to George.
George Ingram with the Brookings Institution. Development finance. We're seeing the role of the private sector in development playing a much larger role, especially through the SDGs. There's legislation in the House and the Senate being drafted to either beef up OPIC or create a new development finance corporation. There's work in the administration to try to turn them around on OPIC. What do you see as the role of development finance and the prospect of beefing up OPIC and bringing OPIC and TDA together in a stronger organization?
Great question. Thank you for that. And in the back, Michael Igo.
Thanks, Michael Igo with DevEx. You, Senator Cardin, said that you'd rather be having a conversation about opportunities to cooperate for American security. I wonder if there are any areas where you do see alignment with the Trump administration. Mark Green, for example, has mentioned that he might want to tackle procurement reform, look at the ways that aid spends its money. Is that something that Congress is also interested in? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for those. Yeah. Maybe we can start with fragile states quickly.
Sure. You're correct on fragile states need to be our priority, but here's our dilemma. Our dilemma is that we have some big ticket items in countries that are in the news every day that are not going to be solved in the short term, that are taking a lot of our attention and a lot of our resources. We have many fragile states that could use our assistance that are only getting crumbs, only getting a few dollars, particularly in Africa, where we can make a much more dramatic difference if we would invest, particularly in development assistance, in democracy. The two areas where I think we've underinvested is in democracy building and fighting corruption. They're the two areas where I think we could do a much more effective job. And Africa is a continent in which we are I think, well underserved from what we can do.
What about OCO in that context, the emergency funds that are off budget? There's been talk about getting those back to being on the budget. Do you think OCO persists even as we go forward to an FY18, FY19 budgets?
It's a part of the procurement issue. I mean, I think OCO funds are ridiculous. I mean, there's no justification for it. They're not permanent funds. You need permanent certainty as to what these programs are going to look like. You don't need the fact that we thought we were going to be spending a lot more money in Afghanistan or Iraq, and therefore we had this money that we can shift around for the next couple of years, and then it's gone. Where do you get the money after that? Mm-hmm. So I think the OCA funding is a budget disaster, and it's giving us a crutch. We need honest budgeting in Washington. We need a budget that makes sense, and that's sustainable, and it's long-term, and it deals with the fiscal responsibility and deals with priority setting and has a fair tax component to it and deals with mandatory spending, and we have predictability. And OCA is hurting us in achieving those goals, and too much of the State Department's budget is not permanent funding, and that to me is a major, major problem of concern. Well, so let me just take the procurement issue, because I think procurement is an area where there is an agreement between Congress and the administration that it needs to be strengthened. We had the issue with the food aid, which was Senator Corker raised that issue, I think in a very effective way. I think there was a lot of support for what he was trying to accomplish in procurement reform. So I think former Minister Shaw was interested in procurement reform. So I think there is a great deal of interest in trying to find better accountability within the way that we deliver development assistance. We certainly want anti-corruption provisions in our aid. One of the bills that I filed, I'm really trying to get passed, I need your help, is a bill that would use corruption indexes like we do trafficking indexes as a way of as to how we deal with countries. But part of it is if they don't score high enough, there's anti-corruption provisions included in their foreign assistance. So we use that to end a particular issue. So I think there are issues like that we could very well work together on the procurement issues. The other matter...
Yeah, George was asking about this interesting situation we're in where originally OPIC was going to be slashed according to the president's budget, and now we have an OPIC leader who says we're going to build it. There's a lot of talk about actually expanding it and then making it a development finance institution in its own right. What are your thoughts about that?
I think the majority of the members of Congress recognize the value of OPEC and related organizations, the majority. Not all. There are some who look at that as corporate welfare, and therefore we should eliminate it, and the government should never be in this business, and thinks the United States should do unilateral withdrawal from helping our companies compete globally for markets. But that's the minority. But it's a noisy minority. And they've been successful in blocking permanent authorizations from passing. But we are hopeful that we will find a working majority that will there's obviously some need for reform here. The way we budget is not exactly accurate. My chairman is very upset on the budgeting issues of OPEC. So we're going to have to deal with some of the related issues. But I think at the end of the day, we will be successful in maintaining and strengthening those tools.
We're going to do one more quick round of questions. Back here, all the way in the back, and then over here. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Senator. Jay Knott with Apt Associates. Whenever you're doing constituent visits, you can come see us in Bethesda.
Well, Maryland has wonderful development assistant organizations. We think we are the center in the universe for these organizations. So if you're not located there, I'll give you my card afterwards, give you a chance to be there.
My question is, so the continuing resolutions have been a reprieve. We're essentially still living under Obama administration era fiscal regimes, but as currently constructed, they can't go on forever. It's a slowly moving vehicle rolling towards a cliff called sequestration. So my question is, come December, how is this all going to work out?
Thank you for that. We got a mic all the way in the back. Go ahead.
Yes, also from the Center of the Development Universe, Jill Marie Gershutz with the Catholic Relief Services.
Great organization. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership, Senator. We're grateful to have you in these difficult times. My question is around humanitarian reform and any thoughts you might have around, obviously, some of the rumors we'd heard about the what I like to think of as a tripartition of BPRM at State Department, so populations, refugees, and migration, and any ideas you might have for getting money on the ground faster when there are mass movements of people, the Rohingya being only the latest example.
Thank you. And then we've got a question right over here.
Hi, Senator Caitlin Horrigan with Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and thanks for joining us at the Kids Markup yesterday. I wanted to express concern not only about the budget cuts, but also some of the policy that has been newly applied to global health, namely the expanded global gag rule. And as you may know, the State Department is committed to do a 6-month review of the policy, but we've heard scant details about what that might entail. So I'm wondering if you can share with us any ideas about how to hold them accountable to a meaningful review, and ideally one that occurs annually so that we can track the long-term impacts of the policy.
Thank you for that. Why don't we start with Caitlin's question?
Yeah, I think I'll do them in reverse order because the budget issue is could keep me here all day. So the global gag rule is something, because I opposed it under the previous Republican administrations. So I've always opposed it. But what the Trump administration has done is much, much more dangerous because it goes well beyond family planning type funds. And it affects our basic partnerships that we have globally on global health, including jeopardizing the PEPFAR program. So it is an extremely dangerous proposal. What I would suggest, and this may be difficult, but to work in a quiet way with Republicans who understand what has happened here, to try to get modifications by the president. I don't think we can win votes on this on the floor of Congress. So I think we need to be effective in getting the administration to recognize what they've imposed is not what has been done by previous Republican administrations. And again, I would oppose that form of the gag rule, but at least to ease up some of the devastating consequences of our partnerships with major organizations in our campaign. I hope that could work. In regards to refugees, the United States has always taken the leadership on refugees. We've taken the leadership certainly financially. We have provided more assistance than any other country to help worldwide refugee issues. And we have a proud tradition of using our foreign policy to keep borders open to protect individuals. We're working right now on the tragic situation in Burma with the Rohingya population. So there are just serious challenges all over the world with refugees. We have more displaced people now than we've had since the end of World War II. We might even be exceeding those numbers from what I understand on displaced and people and refugees. So we've always shown great leadership. We still see that as far as the Appropriations Committee and the budget support. We haven't seen a major shift. But clearly the President's language on our domestic commitment to take in refugees is having a significant impact on America's global leadership. It's difficult for us to have standing in asking countries to keep their borders open when we don't have our borders open to the refugee problems within our own hemisphere. So we've lost that, I think, credibility, and it's having a major impact.
And I just want to make sure we get to that point about EPRM and the specific potential reorg in the State Department.
Right, and again, from my understanding, there is no support for that within the State Department. This is not a request that I think has been made by Homeland Security, but I think there is a real risk factor. They may divide the functions, and there may be part of the functions that are going to be transferred to the Department of Homeland Security. I think that's a major mistake, but I think that's a real risk factor from what we are hearing. But as far as from the leadership of the State Department, they are opposed to those changes being made. We have voiced our opposition to it. I believe you'll see some legislative action that may also try to prevent that from physically happening. So let me talk about the budget. I think CRs are a disaster. It's a failure. It's Congress's inability to establish yearly priorities. That's what we need to do. Last year's priorities are not this year's priorities. Congress has a responsibility to pass budgets every year. It's a pretty basic thing to pass a budget. You would think it's a basic thing, and yet we don't pass budgets. And we have CRs and omnibuses. And I think that's a mistake. Now, this year we're in a little bit different circumstance because of where we are with President Trump and his budget. So in leveraging passing an omnibus or appropriation bill, we're in better position because a CR is not as threatening on the funding levels. So that gives us more leverage to hold out for a better budget. And that's what we intend to do. And that's what I hope the Congress will do. I'm not sure this will be a partisan division. When I talk to appropriators, there isn't as much division between Democrats and Republicans on appropriation levels. We can on the individual appropriation bills. The overall numbers have always been challenging. So the worst thing that can happen is a government shutdown. The worst thing can happen is we would default on our debt. Both are at risk. Certainly at the end of this year, although I think the debt ceiling, they said now, is March rather than the end of this year. Then CRs are, to me, unacceptable. To fall back to a sequestration would be disastrous. It would be disastrous for both defense and non-defense. We should eliminate that. So we should have predictable budgets, and we should pass them. And even if we were to pass a budget that is 4% less for development assistance, but it was a real budget, I would prefer that over a CR at the current level, because at least you have the confidence that Congress is supporting what you're doing.
Can you handicap that for us, the probability that we have a real budget? You're on the Senate Finance Committee as well.
I would say it is by when? You know, I mean, we've passed budgets, I think, as late as March, April, May. Whether we could get a budget done in all categories by December, I think would be unlikely. I think we will have some CR until next year. Probably, I mean, it may line up with the debt ceiling. I think the majority leader does not want it lining up with the debt ceiling, because that gives, again, those of us who want a more progressive budget greater strength. Democrats are much more likely to vote for a debt ceiling increase than Republicans. Therefore, they need our votes. We get something for it. We can get a better budget, a more progressive budget. So we may try to push it into March because of that issue. So there's so much dynamics going here. And then we have a tax bill, which is their #1 priority. Then you have a health care bill, which is,
Looks dead now.
well, the bill is not dead, people. The health care bill is not dead. I believe the Republicans will keep it. I don't know if they'll be able to pass it this week. I don't think they can pass it this week. But they can always continue, if they can pass another budget resolution, the health care debate for the rest of this Congress. So I think it's going to be part of the mix. So there's a lot in the mix. So it's not a simple question as to whether we can get a budget done by September 30th. I don't think we'll pass a budget on time. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. I don't think we're passing it in the next 3 days. Remember, the fiscal year starts October 1. But remember, we're still in last fiscal year's budget resolution. This is a budget resolution that should have been passed before October 1, 2016, that we're still on. So we should pass a budget. And by the way, states have already passed their budgets based upon what's in our FY18 budget that we have no chance of passing by the beginning of the fiscal year. The bottom line is this is terribly irresponsible. And don't blame President Trump for this. This is Congress's failure. Don't blame the Republicans. This is a failure by both Democrats and Republicans to get an orderly budget process, and we should have an orderly budget process.
We need to get you back to the Hill for some of this important work. Please join me in thanking Senator Ben Cardin.
Thanks, Raj.
Thank you. You know the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. These are interesting times. We at DevX are going to keep covering these issues. We thank you for taking the time with us. We thank PACT for underwriting this event, Microsoft for hosting us in this fabulous space, and all of you for spending some time with us today, including those on the live stream. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.